Hello everybody and welcome back to more of the Fruit of Grisaia. Here we are. Sachi's in a new school, in a new town, living with her aunt and uncle. Her dad was killed in the accident, her mother's still in the hospital, so she has to go somewhere. Sachi finally, her mind shifted to where she's going to be a good girl, as those were her words, not mine. Where she's basically not going to, stir the pot up too much, you know what I mean? She's gonna, do what she's told, and that's that. After a few months, I'd gotten thoroughly settled in at my new school. Once again, I attracted a crowd of friendly faces. For the most part, they asked me to see my homework for assistance in some extracurricular activity or help with their studies. And as I reliably satisfied these requests, the number of people who approached me steadily increased. Apparently, there's this super talented saint in Class 1C. Such rumors spread across the school, and I became something of a minor celebrity. And in time, I began to encounter those who found that irksome. Among them, a girl named Hitomi Nakano from my class. She labeled herself as a delinquent. Most labeled her as a delinquent. I cannot talk today. What is wrong with me? She kept herself largely aloof from the rest of the class, so it came as something of a surprise when, one day, she suddenly called out to me. She's totally gonna take advantage of Sachi, because she knows that she can't say no. It began with that trivial favor, no different from those I'd performed for countless others. But Hitomi Nakano repeated that request every time it was her turn to clean the classroom. Of course, I continued to readily accept. And one day, after this pattern had continued for some time, Well, at least Hitomi's blunt about it.
いじめはいじめられる側に自覚があれば成立するって言われているけど、だとしたら私にその自覚はないからいじめじゃないんじゃないかな。
それ本気で言ってんの？
だって人の言うことを聞くのがいい子で聞かないのは悪い子でしょ。私はその考えに従ってるだけだから。
は？じゃあ何？あんた、私が永遠に掃除当番変われって言ったら変わってくれるわけ？
うん、中野さんがそう言うならそうするよ。
へえ、言うじゃん。じゃあさ、掃除当番は変わらなくていいから一人でこの学校の窓全部拭いて回ってみてよ。どう？できないでしょ。
いいよ。
Although I accepted Nakano-san's request, she didn't seem particularly pleased. In fact, she clicked her tongue in disgust and stalked right out of the classroom. What was she so angry about? Again, the matter over, I took out a supply of cleaning implements from my locker. And just as directed, I made my way around the school, cleaning the windows. After our classroom, I moved on to the other first-year rooms, the hallway and the faculty room, making steady progress. Once the school building was closed, however, my pace was slowed somewhat by the need to hide from the patrolling teachers. Nonetheless, I persevered at my task. Even after the sun fell, I continued wiping in dogged silence. My arms quickly grew heavy from the sustained effort of reaching up to clean the higher windows, and after a few hours, my shoulders were screaming with pain. Even so, I kept my hands moving. I had my directions, and I had to obey them. My personal circumstances were irrelevant. My body might ache or suffer injury, but neither mattered as long as it could move. If movements were to become impossible, I would simply reassess the situation and attempt to find alternate means to accomplish my task. At the moment, wiping all of the windows in the school clean took priority above all else. When she found me in the hallway the next morning still wiping windows, Hitomi Nanako's jaw dropped open.
あんた、何やってるの？
何って言われた通りに窓を拭いてるんだけど。
言われた通りにって、まさか本当にあれからずっと学校の窓を拭いてたわけ？
うん、さすがに学校が広いから今日の授業が始まるまでにっていうのは無理だったけど、もう少し時間をもらえればちゃんと終わるから。
For a brief moment, her eyes went wide, and in the next, she roared with laughter.
あんた、間違いなくいい子だよ。それは私が保証してあげる。
ありがとう。
お礼まで言って。こいつ本物だわ。小峰、窓拭きはここで終わりでいいわよ。
そうなの？
ええ。その代わり、今日からあんたは私の奴隷になりなさい。
うん、わかった。
やっぱりね。じゃあ、これから私に対しては敬語を使うこと。それから、私が何か命令をした時の返事は、はい、わかりました。
はい、わかりました。ありがとうございます。
I didn't particularly hesitate at the prospect of becoming a slave. If that was what she wanted from me, and if it was within my power to play that role, I had no reason to object. And so, having assumed the position of Hitomi Nakano's obedient minion, carrying out her orders became the central element of my new daily routine.
小峰、あとはよろしくね。
はい、わかりました。
I can't quite remember how many times we repeated this exchange. It happened too often for me to be sure. My more common duties involved completing her homework by proxy, helping her cheat on tests, and arranging cruel pranks against those she disliked. There were other requests as well. Every once in a while she'd call for me in the middle of the night simply to mock me for actually showing up. After laughing with her friends, she would send me right back home. But that was alright with me. I was her slave, so all I needed to concern myself was executing her commands. No matter how difficult the orders she gave me, through careful thought and diligent effort, I would always find a method of carrying them out. When I succeeded, her mood would often improve. On occasion, she even offered a few words of praise for her good girl. But more than anything else, simply obeying someone's instructions was pleasant in itself. While executing her orders, there was no need to think about anything else. The reason for those orders, the consequences of successfully carrying them out, anything and everything else was totally irrelevant. In those moments and those moments alone, the burden of the guilt I carried with me was lifted from my shoulders, and the image I wanted to erase from my mind more than anything else stayed safely buried away. Therefore, there was nothing wrong about this. A good girl does what she's told. I believed absolutely in those words. For me, they had become a kind of a faith. However, not everyone saw things the same way. After about 2 years as her slave, my master began to show some signs of discontentment with our arrangement. When I answered her orders with a prompt yes, certainly, and a nod, I could see a flash of irritation in her eyes. Perhaps as a result, I soon noticed that the orders I'd begun to escalate in scale and difficulty as well, and when I had returned to report my success, she'd respond only with a displeased grunt. Eventually, I asked whether I'd done something to offend her. And that was her, admittedly rather irrational, answer. Naturally, I then inquired whether I should fail every so often, but this inspired only a more pronounced scowl.
でも失敗させてみるっていうのも悪くないわよね。
え？
じゃあさ、あんたに最後の命令を出してあげる。
最後の命令？
そう。2週間後にある中間テスト。あれ、なくしてよ。
テスト？
人の言うことを聞くのがいい子だって言うなら、こういうお願いも聞いてくれるよね。
She's giving her a seemingly impossible test.
どうなの？やれるの？
はい、私はいい子ですから。
言ったわね。いい？一度やるって言ったんだから、絶対やんなさいよ。後で、やっぱりできませんでした。すみませんって謝ってきても。はい。
わかりました。
How's Sachi gonna pull this one off, I wonder? From the moment I nodded my head, it was perhaps all but decided that I would end up in Mahama Academy. When she asked me if I was up for it, I heard a voice scream, "Don't!" In some corner of my mind, I don't know. But soon enough, as the image of that day began to flicker its own warning before my eyes, that voice of caution was obliterated without a trace. There was nothing left to stop me. For the next few days, I frantically racked my brains in search of a method to get rid of the scheduled midterm tests. How about stealing the tests before they can copy them? No, even if I were to find the originals, the test would be recreated. At most, I would earn a brief delay. In that case, how about copying the test secretly and bringing her the answers? No, while that might ensure her a perfect score on her exams, the tests themselves would be held as usual.
じゃあ、どうすればいい？どうすればテストをなくすことができるの？
The more ideas I ran through, the more I realized the enormous difficulty of the task at hand. My focus grew, slowly more intense and obsessive. My thoughts ran in circles. The game was actually pretty good about errors and words and stuff. I haven't really found anything, and that's probably the first one I've run across. To make matters worse, as the day of the test grew inexorably closer, I began to see the familiar nightmares I had thought behind me. And so, driven slowly but surely into desperation, I finally arrived at my conclusion.
だったら、学校をなくしちゃえばいいんだ。学校がなくなってしまえば、テストも授業も全部なくなってしまう。
The moment I spoke those words, my ears filled with a high-pitched, almost nostalgic buzzing, and my consciousness was shrouded in fog. When I came to my senses, I was standing inside my school. At my feet were a pile of kerosene cans, the same sort my uncle stockpiled as fuel for our heaters. Presumably, I had carried them from my house to this building over the course of numerous round trips. And indeed, my arms and shoulders were throbbing with agony. The situation was clear enough. Moving as though possessed, I emptied the cans all around the building in what felt like minutes, ignoring the protests of my exhausted body. And in the end, I stood in my classroom and set the fire. The instant I dropped my match into the kerosene, flames sprouted up as though I'd flipped a switch on a stovetop. The fire sped rapidly down the fuse of oil and into the hallway. In the blink of an eye, the fire spread and grew, feeding off the wooden walls and desks, consuming the paper textbooks and cloth bags my classmates had left behind. The flames danced before my eyes. Even from a distance, I felt their heat on my skin. Just as I observed that it was becoming slightly painful to breathe the heated air, the shrill sound of the fire alarm began to resound throughout the building. The classroom I had studied in only yesterday was consumed in a literal sea of fire. And yet, even as a part of my world vanished before my eyes, I felt nothing in particular. Look at it burn. The thoughts running through my mind were nothing but the disinterested impressions of a casual spectator. Having determined that it would be impossible to stay in this place any longer, I carefully exited the classroom through the nearest window. As I lowered myself onto the grass outside, I could hear the sound of distant sirens. How far would the flames reach before that fire engine arrived? How much damage before they could extinguish the blaze? No, it no longer mattered. The midterm exams would doubtlessly be cancelled regardless. I carried out my orders. I did what I was told. I was still a good girl. Yes. As long as I'm a good girl, Nothing else matters.